At a certain age, Apache boys were not asked what they wanted to become. They were told it was time to find out who they already were. Not through lessons, not through stories, and not through protection, but through isolation, hunger, and silence. They were sent alone into the wilderness with no food and no help. Because identity, in Apache belief, could not be given, it had to be revealed. This was not abandonment. It was a deliberate psychological separation from dependency. No elders followed at a distance. No supplies were hidden nearby. The boy was removed from every familiar source of reassurance at once. Because as long as help existed, the mind would cling to it. Food was withheld for a reason. Hunger strips away performance and pretense. When the body weakens, the mind can no longer maintain masks. Fear, doubt, and desire surface without filters. The Apache believed this state revealed truth more reliably than comfort ever could. Only when nothing was left to distract him could a boy hear what mattered. The quest was not about survival skills. The boy was not expected to hunt, track, or prove toughness. He was expected to endure himself. To stay present while fear, hunger, and loneliness spoke loudly. To resist the urge to flee back to familiarity. Staying was the real test. During this isolation, visions were expected, but not forced. A vision was not a hallucination or fantasy. It was understood as a moment of clarity that emerged under pressure. Sometimes it came as an animal, sometimes a symbol, sometimes a deep knowing. Whatever appeared was believed to reflect the boy's nature and future path. The wilderness acted as a mirror, not a teacher. Returning from the vision quest did not make the boy celebrated. It made him known. The community listened to what he experienced. Not to judge it, but to understand him. From that point on, he was treated according to what had been revealed. The quest did not create identity, it uncovered it. This was not a gentle system, but it was precise. Fear was not removed by reassurance. It was exhausted through solitude. The boy learned that fear could speak without being obeyed. And that lesson stayed long after hunger faded. On ancient paths of men, this pattern appears again and again. Different lands, different rituals, the same objective. Before a boy could belong to the tribe, he had to belong to himself. And that could only happen alone. They did not choose isolation to be cruel. They chose it because identity collapses under observation. As long as elders watched, a boy would perform instead of listen. As long as approval was possible, behavior would bend toward it. The Apache understood that the self cannot reveal itself while being seen. So the boy was removed from every witness. Silence was not an absence in this process. It was the primary tool. Without voices, instructions, or correction, the mind turned inward. Thoughts that were normally drowned out began to surface. Fear spoke first, loudly and urgently. But when fear exhausted itself, something quieter followed. Hunger played a specific role. It weakened the body just enough to dissolve resistance. The will could no longer posture or pretend strength. Energy was conserved, movement slowed, and attention sharpened. The Apache believed this stripped life down to essentials. What remained was closer to truth than anything learned in comfort. This is where visions emerged, not as spectacle, but as clarity. Exhaustion lowered the noise of constant thought. Hunger quieted ambition and expectation. In that stillness, meaning could surface. Sometimes it arrived as an animal, sometimes as a path, sometimes as a deep inner certainty. Whatever appeared was accepted, not analyzed. The vision was never explained for him. Interpretation came later, with elders who understood symbols. But the experience itself belonged only to the boy. No one could take it from him or give it meaning prematurely. That ownership mattered more than accuracy. Because confidence comes from lived truth, not explanation. After returning, the boy was no longer treated as undefined. He had crossed a threshold that could not be reversed. Fear no longer carried the same authority. Solitude was no longer unfamiliar. He had endured himself without distraction. That alone changed how he stood in the world. Modern societies rarely offer this kind of encounter. We fill every silence and medicate every discomfort. Being alone is framed as dangerous rather than necessary. So identity remains untested. Fear remains abstract. And adulthood arrives without internal grounding. On ancient paths of men, this pattern keeps repeating. Different cultures used different tools. Some used danger. Some used solitude. But all understood the same principle. A boy cannot know who he is until he meets himself without help. And that leaves a question worth sitting with. What happens when that meeting never occurs? When silence is avoided and hunger is unthinkable? When fear is never allowed to fully speak? The Apache solved this once, with precision. Modern life has yet to replace it. They believed solitude was not emptiness. It was compression. When everything external was removed, whatever remained inside became undeniable. A boy could no longer borrow courage from others or hide behind imitation. There was no audience to perform for and no rulebook to follow. Only presence, discomfort, and time. Time behaved differently during the quest. Without tasks, schedules, or voices, minutes stretched. Thoughts repeated themselves until they lost their power. Fear could not distract forever. It eventually burned itself out. What followed was clarity, not confidence. Clarity about limits, impulses, and direction. This is why the quest was solo. A group would dilute the experience. Shared suffering becomes comparison, competition, and hierarchy. Alone, there was no ranking, only honesty. The boy faced his own thresholds, not someone else's. That made the result personal and irreversible. The Apache did not expect every boy to receive a grand vision. Some returned with a clear symbol. Others returned with quiet certainty. Both were valid. The absence of spectacle did not mean failure. Endurance itself was evidence. This restraint is important to understand. The ritual was not about producing dramatic stories. It was about producing grounded men. Men who did not need constant affirmation. Men who could stand in uncertainty without collapsing. Men who knew themselves well enough to serve the group. The community changed how it related to him afterward. Not with praise, but with expectation. He was trusted with responsibility appropriate to what he revealed. Identity informed duty. Duty reinforced identity. This feedback loop replaced confusion with direction. Compare this to modern transitions. Age changes legally, but not internally. Responsibility arrives before grounding. Identity is postponed, questioned, and reworked endlessly. Without a defining encounter, adulthood feels provisional. Fear fills the gap. This is why ancient systems emphasized thresholds. Before and after mattered. Once crossed, there was no return to ambiguity. The vision quest drew a clear line. On one side was dependence. On the other was self-ownership. On ancient paths of men, these thresholds are not nostalgia. They are diagnostic tools. They reveal what modern life removed without replacing. Not the rituals themselves, but the function they served. Pressure with meaning. Solitude with purpose. The deeper question is not whether hunger or isolation were ethical. The deeper question is what happens when nothing replaces them. When fear is never exhausted. When silence is never endured. When identity is never tested. History suggests the cost is paid later. And this is where the lesson sharpens. The Apache did not trust comfort to produce strength. They trusted encounter. They trusted limits. They trusted that the self, when pressed, would reveal truth. And they built a system around that belief. From here, the path connects outward. Other cultures solved the same problem differently. Some used danger. Some used pain. Some used responsibility. But none ignored the problem. If this reframes how you see fear, solitude, or growth, sit with it. Not everything valuable arrives as comfort. Some truths require removal before they appear. The Apache understood this. They built for it. And the results lasted. What matters most is not the hardship itself. Hardship alone teaches nothing. What mattered was intentional design. Every element of the vision quest removed something artificial. Food removed performance. Silence removed imitation. When food disappears, the mind stops negotiating with comfort. Energy becomes precious. Thoughts slow down. Every movement becomes deliberate. In that state, impulses are exposed instead of acted out. The boy learned which urges were real and which were noise. Silence completed the process. Without voices, stories could not be borrowed. Without advice, identity could not be outsourced. The boy was forced to listen to what arose naturally. Not what sounded impressive, but what persisted when everything else fell away. This is why the quest was temporary. Too much isolation breaks instead of reveals. The Apache understood limits. The boy was returned before confusion replaced insight. Pressure was applied, then released. Meaning emerged in the narrow window between. What emerged was not certainty about the future. It was orientation. A sense of direction without needing a map. A feeling for what fit and what didn't. This internal compass mattered more than plans. It guided choices long after the quest ended. This orientation reduced fear in a subtle way. Fear thrives on indecision. When direction exists, fear loses leverage. Uncertainty remains, but paralysis fades. The man can move without knowing everything. That is real courage. Modern systems rarely cultivate this. We offer information instead of orientation. Choices instead of thresholds. Endless options instead of commitment. So fear multiplies instead of clarifies. Direction is postponed indefinitely. The vision quest solved this by narrowing the field. Few inputs. Few choices. One task: stay. In staying, the boy learned he could endure uncertainty without disintegrating. That lesson echoed forward. This endurance was not loud. It did not announce itself. It showed up later, quietly. In how the man handled loss. In how he handled waiting. In how he handled responsibility without applause. On ancient paths of men, this is the through line. Ancient cultures built men who could tolerate inner weather. Storms came and went. The man remained. Not because he was numb, but because he had already met himself at his limits. The lesson is not to starve boys or abandon them. The lesson is that identity requires pressure with meaning. Without it, fear fills the vacuum. With it, fear becomes information instead of command. The Apache understood this deeply. They designed for it intentionally. And this leaves us with a final tension. Modern life removed these encounters for good reasons. But it replaced them poorly. Comfort increased. Clarity decreased. The cost is visible everywhere. The path forward is not backward imitation. It is functional replacement. Rituals that test without breaking. Solitude without abandonment. Difficulty with meaning. That is the work ahead. If this challenges how you think about fear, growth, or becoming a man, stay with it. Questions like these are not meant to comfort. They are meant to clarify. This is ancient paths of men. And clarity always has a cost. But confusion costs more.